Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rudy Inaba, and thank you for joining us on today's webinar with Cenegenics. I'd like to, before we get started, I want to remind everyone that at the end of this presentation and webinar, we'll have a question and answer. That I'm happy to answer any of the questions you may have after learning some of the materials during today's presentation. So today, what we'll be looking at are hidden reasons that it's more challenging to lose weight as you age. So there's a quote from Phil McGraw that says that successful weight loss takes programming, not willpower. And that's absolutely true. We can tough things out for so long and, have that willpower to sustain a certain lifestyle. However, in many cases, that is going to, go away at some point. More successful weight loss, just with anything else, takes, the correct path that's put in place and the right program that's put in place to work with the individual and have them reach more successful patterns time and time again. So before we get into some of the hidden reasons, we want to look at some weight loss statistics. So nearly half of US adults have tried to lose weight within the last year, so just over 49%. Older adults, so those that were 60 and older, they were the smaller group at around 41%, as you can see in the graph. Middle-aged adults that made up the bulk of it, so adults that were 40 to 59 years old, had around 52% tried to lose weight within the past year, and young adults, 20 to 39, also tried to lose weight almost at that exact 50% mark. The efforts for weight loss did skew female a little bit. However, when you look at the graph comparing to men to women, it's really not too far off, 41% of men and 56% of women. And they've done a number of things to help them lose weight. They reported either eating less or exercising more, so 2/3 of each had those. And about 50% also reported eating more fruits, vegetables, and salads to lose weight. So they were making cognizant efforts for their nutrition and exercise. Now, the weight loss industry in the US is enormous. In 2018, the weight loss industry as a whole grew by 4%, and it is currently valued at $72 billion. And a weight loss industry can include things like nutraceuticals that are sold in the grocery stores, beverages, food items that are all diet-based, dieting programs that are sold. So collectively, the weight loss industry in the US is valued at $72 billion. There were some changes that have been trending over maybe the past 5 to 10 years. And that's as the weight loss industry prepares for more of a millennial market majority. As we saw in that last slide, the majority of the weight loss efforts within the past year were for 40 to 59-year-olds. However, the 20 to 39-year-olds weren't really that far behind. So you see these trends that are changing within the weight loss market, having more social media influencers and promoting more weight loss efforts via social media. You see programs changing their price points and kind of changing how they're tailored, offering more virtual options as well as applications that they can use on their smartphones. But there's the shift. Other things that have changed are like Weight Watchers are rebranding into a more modern position. I believe Jenny Craig is up for sale. And there are other major ones like Nutrisystem was actually just acquired by another large company. There's another major diet organization that makes prepackaged foods that were actually just acquired as well. So the weight loss industry is huge, and they're just preparing and getting ready for these trends in the market for the population that they're going to be working with. Another interesting thing that we saw are that meal replacement shakes and bars, just shakes and bars alone. And that's powdered, ready to drink items that you can find at the grocery stores or supplement stores. And protein bars are valued at around $4.7 billion in itself, and that represented a 6.8% growth. Another really interesting component is that there were 239,000 bariatric surgeries performed in the United States in 2018, and that's a 5% growth rate. To break that down on a weekly basis, that's a little bit over 4,500 bariatric surgeries completed in the US every single week. So the food industry, also has seen a lot of changes. The US organic fruit and vegetable sales, I used 2015 because it was a huge jump. There was a 10.5% increase in organic fruit and vegetable sales in the US, jumping up to $14.4 billion. The global gluten-free market is growing at a compounded annual growth rate to hit almost $4.9 billion in 2021. Diet dinner entrees, so frozen food, pre-cooked meals, those are almost a $2 billion market. And the natural food and beverage products are outpacing sales growth for conventional products. So your natural food and beverages items in your grocery stores are actually growing more rapidly than the traditional conventional products at a national level. And that's what this graph represents. we see growth literally in every single region. The Southeast is the little bit slower one. However, we're still seeing growth there. And what's really interesting is that, with all these changes with fruit and vegetable increases and diet foods and natural foods, Americans are still reportedly not hitting numbers from the Institute of Medicine for vitamin A. We have about 50% of the population are not at sufficient levels. 40% of the population are not sufficient with the vitamin C levels. And then 90% of the population are insufficient with vitamin D and E levels. So, with so many promising trends with the food industry, with the weight loss industry growing, with U.S. citizens, getting more involved with how they're eating and how they're exercising with their efforts to lose weight, why do so many people struggle? Because the data is there. 40% of all U.S. adults are considered obese. There's arguments on both sides saying that, obesity measurements for these scales are based off of body mass index, but, it's not in a large scale of population, it's helpful to see. Just for a piece of reference, for an obese individual, so if you take a man who's 6 feet tall, so 72 inches, if he's like 220, 225 pounds, he's considered, obese. So really 2 out of every 5 people are going to be in that kind of size frame. And a 6 foot man that's 220 pounds, it's not like you would think anything of it when you see someone. But odds are body composition is thrown off unless he's a more fit individual. So there are common challenges as we age from our physiology, but also from our environments. Professional responsibilities change as we get older. As we go from our 20s into our 30s, our 40s, 50s, 60s, and so on, there are a lot of things that occur and a lot of things that compound, annually and decade over decade. But professional responsibilities change. Typically, if you're going deeper into a career, you're going to experience more stressors that are involved with that work-life balance. Travel could become an item that's a requirement for your work. You have limited time. Maybe office time has changed. Maybe the demand has changed. There are personal responsibilities. Obviously, we all have personal responsibilities at any age. However, there could be changes with family, from someone going from, single with no children to being married, having kids, having grandkids, and so on, sharing a household, moving. All these things can affect really how many things are on our plate from a day-to-day basis of what we're responsible for. And really one of the big common challenges we face as we age is we kind of have an aha moment because things catch up with us. A cumulative effect of our lifestyle that we've had over a decade or 2 decades, whatever it may be, that can be excessive food consumption, poor quality foods, not eating enough fruits and vegetables, not eating enough proteins, maybe drinking too much, being sedentary, not getting exercise in. You might be able to get by the week or the month without really significant changes. However, living that lifestyle, for a year and then for another year and another year and for a decade, that really does start to catch up with us until we finally see a breaking point. And, it's tough to see the changes that we see in smaller windows, but over a larger window, then it's kind of surprising in many cases. So there's many factors, but the factors that we want to get in today, I want to focus on more core items. You'll look in the media and you'll see, drink this new nutraceutical and it's what people are missing to help with fat loss efforts, or do X, Y, and Z, and it's the missing component for people to manage their weight. And in many cases, there's not something completely wrong with that. There's usually some kind of data to substantiate some claim. However, in many cases, those are periphery items. With periphery items, they're not going to really affect the individual unless those core items are handled. So I want to go over some of the core items today that, and certain components of those core items that are often overlooked. So with that, we're going to be looking at nutrition, looking at macronutrient and micronutrient consumption, as well as the calorie supply and demand. For exercise, we're going to get into a little bit of things related to intensity, frequency, duration, and mode, which a lot of people they don't neglect, they're just unaware of when they engage in an exercise program. Lifestyle, looking at sleep and stress, and also the effects of the endocrine system and how it can impact our weight loss efforts. The endocrine system is very large. There are a lot of major components. However, for today's webinar, we're going to be looking at insulin, cortisol, and also testosterone. So with macronutrients, macronutrients are your carbohydrate, protein, and fat. So there are 3 macronutrients. They are all different. They fuel the body differently. They have different purposes. They are metabolized differently. Carbohydrates are metabolized into glucose. Proteins are broken down into amino acids, and fats are broken down to essential fatty acids. So they all yield different postprandial hormone responses. So postprandial means after you eat them. So fats and proteins aren't really going to require a whole lot of an insulin response. Glucose is the main trigger for insulin. So carbohydrates are going to be, have a really direct relationship with our requirement for insulin after eating them. There are a lot of differences in satiation. So fat is more than twice the caloric component per gram than proteins and carbohydrates. So the amount of calories you're consuming from one of the macronutrients versus the other can affect how longer you stay full. Fiber can be another component. So if you're having carbohydrates that are more fiber dense, that can have a much longer satiation than having a carbohydrate that's more processed that doesn't have a lot of fiber. And they also have different effects on the metabolism, and they're affecting our metabolism differently from the thermic effect of food. I don't know if anyone on the call has joined us in our other webinars, but we discussed how protein actually yields a thermic effect from food around like 10 to 15%. So with micronutrients is kind of digging into the next level, and micronutrients is looking more at our vitamin and mineral intake from the foods that we're consuming. And this is where I like to if I ever get in a conversation with one of my colleagues about there's a not protocol, but there's a style of eating called If It Fits Your Macros. It's been popularized in some forms of media and social media. And it talks about how once you know your weight and your energy expenditure, and you know how many grams of protein and carbohydrates and fats you can eat, you can really fill in those number requirements with really any type of food. It can be, classically, traditionally recognized as healthy foods, or it can be even things like junk foods. But as long as you're within those macronutrient ranges and your caloric ranges, you're not going to have any issues with weight gain. So really, it can be an implementable program. However, when we dig deeper and we look at our micronutrient intake, micronutrients are highly important for a lot of the body's functions. B vitamins impact our mitochondrial energy production. Fat-soluble vitamins are required for things like organ function, immune function, cellular damage, blood clotting, bone development. And if you guys remember, those numbers we just went over, around 50% of the U.S. population are not hitting their requirements for vitamin A. So that's your vision and organ function. And 90% of the U.S. population are not in sufficient numbers for vitamin D or vitamin E. So that's your immune system function. So a lot of these things where if you say, X amount of grams of carbohydrate is the same as X amount of grams of this carbohydrate for my weight loss efforts, while from a caloric standpoint, that may be true, from a micronutrient standpoint, that is not true. And long-term commitment to that type of mindset can really yield significant problems over time. Additionally, you're missing out on macro minerals if you're choosing poor quality foods. Things like magnesium are going to be in better foods, and that's going to have impact literally hundreds of enzymatic functions, your blood pressure. Potassium, that's going to affect the fluid status of your cells. And these are all things that can not only impact your health over time, but it can also impact, how well you perform and how well you exercise and how well you digest food. So we talked about macronutrients, micronutrients. The other thing, to pay tribute to is your caloric supply and demand. At Cenegenics and at many programs, we focus on the quality of foods, and that's one of the bigger issues, that many individuals eat really poor quality foods that don't have high essential amino acid contained in them. They don't have good essential fatty acids. They don't have a lot of fiber. They don't have a lot of antioxidants. They don't have a lot of these high quality foods. So one of the biggest battles is incorporating all these high quality foods. And in the early stages of improving your health, consuming these as frequently as you can is going to be a good thing, because it's going to help improve gut health. It's going to help improve really your disease function or your disease risk factors. It's going to help improve insulin function, pancreatic function. But when we start to progress into that next stage of next stage of nutritional awareness, we still need to have respect to the caloric supply and demand. On a personal level, I spoke to my mother about this. She put together a really nice salad, had all these things in there. And, before you know it, a serving size of this, salad for one meal is yielding, almost 75, 80 grams of fat in just one salad. And when you take something that's a good protein with also healthy fatty acids in there, like salmon, which maybe an 8-ounce portion will yield 20 grams of fat, dice up a whole avocado, which maybe gives you another 15 to 20 grams of fat, maybe do 1 to 2 ounces of crushed walnuts in the salad, and then also maybe 2 tablespoons of dressing or even a little bit more from olive oil. When we have all those really good healthy fats, but then when we stack them on top of each other, our caloric intake can really add up. So if we're just trying to maintain our weight, or even if we're trying to build new lean tissue, That's not a problem. However, if our goal is weight loss in this short window of time, then that's a potential thing that we need to pay tribute to. All of those things can absolutely be included into one meal. However, the amount of them needs to be adjusted a little bit so that we're not overfilling our caloric intake for fat within that one meal. So things like maybe having half of the avocado, maybe like a dusting of the chopped walnuts, and maybe tossing the salad in the olive oil and balsamic versus just drizzling a bunch on top of it. So these different strategies can prove helpful, but I think doing this can be helpful over time for a lot of meals. Things when people do whole eggs, which are great, but then they add maybe 1 to 2 ounces of cheese, and they do avocado in an omelet, and they cook it in a tablespoon of butter. These are all okay things to eat, but then they start to add up, and they could be kind of not mystery, but they could be kind of unrecognized caloric consumption that you're getting from excess good foods. So the goals for nutrition would be to heal your gut for optimal nutrient absorption and digestion. And that would be by including a lot of those healthier foods that we discussed, but also from what we discussed last week on our previous webinar for looking at your food allergies and sensitivities and removing some of those foods that are causing those allergic reactions or those sensitivity reactions, because that can affect the lining of the gut. Prioritizing your protein for maintenance and growth of lean muscle mass. That's another thing as we age. We need to maintain our lean muscle mass, and if not, even grow more and get stronger. But at the same time, protein consumption typically goes down as we get older. We don't pay attention to it as much. Maybe breakfast doesn't have protein, or if we do have it, it's only 2 eggs or like a half a cup of strained yogurt. We still want to aim for better portion sizes of protein frequently throughout the day. We're going to be more satiated from that. We're going to be increasing our thermic effect from foods. There's a lot of benefits to consuming protein, not just for building tissue, but also for increasing our metabolism during the day. Carbohydrate consumption should primarily focus on fruit and vegetables. A good way to manage your caloric intake and to really increase your micronutrient intake is to eat a lot of fruit and vegetables. They're going to be loaded with fiber. They're going to be loaded with vitamins and minerals and antioxidants. They have a very limiting amount of carbohydrates in them. So the amount of glucose that you're going to have in the bloodstream after you consume a lot of fruits and vegetables are going to be much lower than eating more of these dense processed carbs. So you're going to have a less of a demand from the pancreas to release insulin, which is then going to be shuttling that glucose into the muscle cell and into the fat cells and also the liver. So if you think about it, if you have, even an apple, which maybe yields 25 grams of carbohydrates versus 25 grams of, crackers or something, the crackers are going to have no fiber. They're going to have the same amount of calories, and you're probably going to be hungry within the next, hour, if not sooner than that. However, if you have an apple, you're getting vitamins, you're getting minerals, you're getting antioxidants, you're getting both soluble and insoluble fiber, and that fiber is going to be more slower digesting, and you're going to be getting a lot more bang for your buck for that same amount of calories that you're consuming. So while that previous method I'd mentioned, that if it fits your macros, is beneficial for weight loss, it doesn't really necessarily make you a lot healthier because you want to have high quality food intake. Fat consumption, I don't want to shy away from people consuming healthy fats from that last slide. Healthy fats are needed. We need them for major components and functions of the body. All of our cellular walls are made of fats. They are integral to everyone's nutrition. However, just be aware that if you are eating really high quality foods and you're doing this from a day-to-day basis and you're doing all these things that we covered today, and you just can't figure out why your weight loss is not changing, take a look and kind of see if you're quote unquote stacking your fats, if you're getting in too many fats per meal, because while consuming fat is great for managing insulin, it's great for staying full, it's great for cellular health. If you're doing too much, it could be doing all these good things, but it could also be limiting your weight loss efforts. So with exercise, we're going to look at 3 things. The first being cardiovascular resistance, and then also flexibility. And cardiovascular exercise or cardiovascular training, the main goal for that is not for fat loss or weight loss or whatever everyone thinks. The main goal for cardiovascular training is to improve the health of our heart and our lungs and to prepare them for, rigorous bouts of intensity. The side effect to getting a healthier heart and getting healthier lungs and getting healthier performance is that it'll help us lose excess fat tissue. Resistance training, the main goal there is to strengthen and build the musculoskeletal system. So we're going to be building lean tissue. We're going to be building bone mass over time. We can also, depending on the style of training, it can improve cardiovascular health. But resistance training is going to help with weight management long term. However, I would not put it at the forefront of a training program if weight loss is really the number one effort. It absolutely has its place and it needs to be there. However, they need to be combined together with resistance and cardiovascular training. Flexibility training's main goal is to optimize mobility and functional movement patterns. So making sure that you can move as a healthy individual and not risk injury over time, especially in a loaded position. Just because someone can sit down in a chair comfortably with their own body weight doesn't mean that it can potentially do the same if they load a weight, when holding it at their chest or holding it behind their back. You want to be able to be very strong in all your movement patterns so that when under load, you can still maintain that mobility and that range of motion and prevent injury. So what we're going to go over for exercise are intensity, both absolute intensity and relative intensity, frequency, duration, and mode. So for cardiovascular exercise, really there's many things you can do, but we can all break it down and dial it down into two different styles, in my opinion. One being what's deemed LISS cardio, being low intensity, steady state, and the other one being HIIT training, and that would be high intensity interval training. So let's look at LISS first. So this is something like you're doing a brisk walk, brisk enough to, really maybe get warm, but not like you're dripping sweat. You're not huffing and puffing. You can maybe hold a mild conversation, not like a, philosophical debate by any means, but you should be able to work at maybe a 60% of your intensity level, which for all intents and purposes is fairly low intensity for what your body is completely capable of. So with lower intensity or with this kind of aerobic style training, your primary energy source that you're using is fat. You're primarily burning fat stores. However, you're only burning a very small percentage of it because energy expenditure is going to be relative to energy output. So if you're not doing something super aggressive, then you're not going to be burning a ton of calories. So when I walk to the bathroom after we have this webinar, I'm not burning a whole lot of fat calories because I'm just leisurely walking. So because of that, if your weight loss efforts are focused around low intensity cardio, you need to do those pretty frequently, and you need to do them for longer durations, like 45, 60 minutes to really get more bang for your buck for the actual cardiovascular session. Frequency could be anything from, 4 days a week to even like a daily walk. And the mode can be personalized. It can be something as a walk, it can be a bike ride, it can be hiking. It can be a number of things that's low intensity. But if you're committing to something low intensity, whether it's for injury reasons or you're just uncomfortable, I would suggest doing it at a higher frequency and a longer duration to maybe push the weight loss efforts a little bit harder. On the other side of the coin is the high intensity interval training. And that intensity is high. It's not like a standard scale that everyone needs to abide to. High intensity is relative to each individual's health. So really, if I take a group of individuals that are very fit or that are, healthy but deconditioned, and those that are deconditioned, they're going to have different things that are going to be defined as high intensity exercise for them. For someone who's a fit individual, that might be running sprints upstairs and doing 2 or 3 up downs for that. For someone who's healthy but deconditioned, that could be getting on a bike and doing 100 revolutions per minute against a moderate resistance. And for someone who's deconditioned and just starting out, that could be literally just walking up a hill. So there's not a set definition of what makes up high intensity exercise. It's really what's going to yield that feeling of high intensity effort. When you're training at higher intensities, you're going to get a lot more bang for your buck, and you don't have to do it as long. So if you're doing high intensity interval training where you're maybe achieving that high intensity interval, maybe 4 to 5 times per training session, your workouts can be limited to 20 minutes. Frequency can maybe be like 2 to 3 days per week. With high intensity exercise, that definition of high intensity is when you go into what's called your anaerobic metabolism. And when you cross over into your anaerobic metabolism, you start to burn stored carbohydrates in the body and the muscles as an immediate energy source. So not only are you helping with your glucose levels and your glycogen stores and improving insulin sensitivity by training up to that high intensity, but you also start to produce a lot of CO2. And your CO2 production starts to outweigh your oxygen consumption, and that puts you in what's called oxygen debt. And our bodies, we can recover from that. We can do that. We're made to do that. If you were at the airport and you were going to miss your flight and you pick up your luggage and you literally sprint down the terminal as fast as you can do it. You're huffing and puffing, you're breathing really hard. You get to your gate and you get there on time, you put your bags down. your breathing is still elevated, but then your heart rate's coming down. You start to feel better maybe after 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever it may be. But the cool thing is that your body is now kind of heightened in a higher fat burning response. After those high level intensity efforts, our bodies start to burn more fats after that exercise is completed as a way to repay that oxygen debt that's occurring. So it's called EPOC. It's excess post-exercise oxygen consumption. And for that specific reason, you don't need to do high intensity training all the time because you have a higher afterburn from this type of training. Again, the mode can be personalized. If someone has healthy knees, hips, ankles, they can run upstairs, they can do hill sprints, they can do a number of things. If someone has limitations, you can perform this exercise on a bike, you can do it on an elliptical. And again, it's relative to the individual. So if someone is deconditioned and they're just starting an exercise program, if they walk at a pretty fast rate, even break into like a mild jog and it creates that huffing and puffing response, that's their high intensity. And it'd be interesting to see because over time, they're going to have to do more and more to trigger that response. And it's a great way to show someone how fit they're getting. So for cardiovascular exercise, the things to remember are the population that you're in, so population, audience, demographic, whatever you want to call it, based on your biomechanics or your injury history and your health status, that's going to dictate what's a better option for you, whether low intensity steady state or high intensity interval training. The amount of time you have to commit to cardiovascular training is also going to impact what decisions you make. At Cenegenics, many of our patients are, their schedules are very busy. So we really lean on high intensity interval training, not only to benefit their cardiopulmonary health and reduce risks of all-cause mortality, but also for weight loss efforts. They're going to have a lot more bang from their buck doing a 20-minute session 3 days per week than going out and walking for 20 minutes 3 days per week. So one thing to remember too with these, potential things that are overlooked is cardiovascular training efforts are either not intense enough, they're either not high effort enough, or the low effort that's being put out is not long enough. So there needs to be a balance. If you feel comfortable and that's in your comfort zone for doing low intensity cardio, then I would push the time frame that you're doing it. However, I do challenge you to push it to a higher intensity within a safe range for yourself. Push yourself into that huffing and puffing, like if you were at the airport and you were about to miss your flight and you needed to get to your gate. So resistance exercise. So again, we're going to look at intensity, frequency, duration, and mode. So intensity for resistance exercise is, I define a little bit differently. Traditionally in exercise physiology, intensity of resistance exercise is based off your repetition maximum. So it's your maximal loading. So 100% intensity is the biggest amount of weight that you can lift on a given exercise for one rep. Now, that has a great function for testing. I mean, the sport of bodybuilding is developed around this. However, for application to, just common people who are just training to live better lives and healthier and get stronger, and even for weight loss, intensity is more defined as like relative intensity for effort. It can be used for rating of perceived exertion, or RPE for short. So if you're training at like a 8 out of 10 intensity level or a 9 out of 10 intensity level, you can utilize those strategies and terms. But having the intensity is going to be important because low intensity doesn't trigger an immediate response. Like I said before, exercise is a stimulus that forces adaptation. And you need something intense enough to trigger an adaptation. If it's not intense enough, the body understands that it can manage that and it doesn't need to adapt. So you need to push to a relative level of intensity and effort to really cause the body to get stronger. Frequency, training frequency impacts training structure. So if someone only has, they can only commit to 2 days per week of resistance training, that's going to impact what kind of muscle groups they're training or how their training structure will be. If someone has 5 days per week, then we're going to take advantage of that and optimize that training structure a little bit more. The duration that they have also is going to be a big thing. If someone has an hour versus someone having 30 minutes. At Cenegenics, when we work with our patients, we go over all of this in our consultations to see what a patient can commit to, because again, it's not about willpower, it's about having the right program. So if we understand which things are non-negotiables for our patient and what kind of time commitment they can abide to, then we know that this is the most optimal training structure for the patient to achieve these results that they want, and they're more likely to be able to stay on track. And the last one we have on there is mode, and the mode of exercise or resistance training is going to be if it's a free weight or fixed weight or cables or bands, really what kind of resistance. And that's going to go back into more so what an individual or a Cenegenics patient has access to. If he's strictly a garage gym guy where he's got barbells, dumbbells, free weights, we're going to be able to develop a program based on that. If he's going to a big gym and he has full accessibility to it, we can include certain machine work or different cable work as well. So programs are going to be yielding, again, all we're doing is creating a stimulus, but we're creating a really accurate stimulus for the individual based on all of these items. So again, when you're developing the exercise program for resistance training, the application is going to focus on the individual, again, injury history, individual biomechanics, what the health status of the person is, what their goals are, what are the priorities. If someone is looking to build X amount of lean tissue within the next 3 months, and they can dedicate that time duration and that frequency and everything to it, we can put that together. However, if someone has a goal that's more long-term and their health status is pretty poor, maybe they are like on the verge of type 2 diabetes, triglyceride levels are high, we're going to take that time frame that we have and kind of work together with the cardiovascular training program to see what's most beneficial for the individual or the patient. One thing I do like to pay tribute to is that, rest periods are commonly not utilized correctly in certain populations that are trying to lose weight. So a lot of times, say for example, we'll just pick one exercise like squats. It can be a free weight squat, leg press machine, doesn't matter. But if someone is trying to lose weight, the data shows that rest periods of around 30 to 90 seconds between lifts are going to be the most optimal for maximizing a metabolic response or increasing our growth hormone response from exercise. And over time, that can help us, burn through our fat stores and improve our insulin sensitivity. Other data shows that at larger rest intervals, like 2.5 minutes, when you do a training program, there was a recent study that came out that showed that with 2.5 minutes of rest periods after the training program of 12 weeks, you saw a larger cross-sectional area of the arms. So meaning the arms got bigger with those longer rest periods. So if you're looking for more muscle growth, longer rest periods can be beneficial. But again, we're talking about weight loss today. So the rest periods are a little bit shorter would be better for the individual. A way to troubleshoot this or to get a lot of bang for your buck, again, the hidden things that we could do would be incorporating supersets. So on that same leg press, if I did a set of leg press or squat and I, had high relative intensity, I pushed within maybe 1 rep of my complete failure, and then I rested for 1 minute. And then after that 1 minute, I went into, leg curls, or I went into, a row, another movement pattern, and I pushed that movement as hard as I could. And then I rested that 60 seconds again, and then I went back to the squat or the leg press. When you do that kind of training program, you're going to be benefiting from the improved metabolic response, being your growth hormone output, by having those short rest intervals. But also from the time I went from leg press, then I did the row, then I went back to the leg press again. Now I have over 2 minutes of recovery on that leg press. So I could potentially sustain my strength. I can sustain my hypertrophy goals, being my muscle growth goals, but also get the metabolic response. There are other lifestyle factors, and we've touched on this in multiple webinars previously, but stress and sleep are 2 major components that can really impact our weight loss efforts. Stress is defined as physical, mental, or emotional strain or tension. It has a lot of different variations, but 77% of U.S. adults experience physical symptoms caused by stress, and even 1/3 of individuals report living with extreme stress. And acute stress, can really impact our metabolic response for about 1.5 hours. And long-term stressors, both physical and emotional and mental, can really impact our immune system and our hormone production. With stress, we produce cortisol from our adrenal function, and our cortisol helps with everything. But cortisol requires pregnenolone to be made, but also testosterone requires pregnenolone to be made. So if we're highly stressed out, we're not recovering from stress, we're not sleeping, we're not eating well, we're not doing, we have all these burdens from stress, we're actually going to be stealing pregnenolone to make cortisol, and then over time, our testosterone production can be impacted. Sleep is a huge one. Sleep also affects stress, because if you're not sleeping, your stress is going to compound and cumulatively add up. 50 to 70 million adults have a sleep disorder. And a short sleep duration is less than 7 hours in 24-hour time period. The big thing for weight loss efforts, not only is it allowing you to recover, it allows you to have better cortisol management, allows you to have better hormone production, but 75% of your growth hormone is also released during your sleep. And it's actually released during the first period of stage 3 sleep. And that's going to allow you to recover from those physical stressors like exercise, and also the other stressors you may have from your personal and professional life. So there's a lot of things you can do, but this is where it gets a little bit choppy, because there's so much interaction and synergy with these components. With stress, meditation has become a lot more mainstream. A lot of different apps are available online that you can use for meditation. But trimming the fat of your schedule, a lot of times busy professionals, we overbook. It's just, we commit ourselves to certain workloads. And if that is affecting your stress levels, like the 1/3 of individuals that claim they are under extreme stress, it may be something to consider to really optimize your daily schedule. Try to exercise with intensity because it takes your mind off of things, but also it's going to make you a little bit more tired, hopefully sleep better. And develop a regular sleep routine. If you have something that's easily maintainable, even on the weekends, it's going to be beneficial long-term to help with your stress management and your sleep patterns. For sleep, you can improve your sleep hygiene. So limiting blue light from electronics, as far away from bedtime as you can, keeping alcohol consumption really down before bed, and large amounts of food should be, not really consumed before bed. In one of our previous talks, we got into how, in the evening, our pineal glands release melatonin, and the melatonin allows us to, get a little drowsy, have good sleep, and get into our good sleeping rhythms. Melatonin is a large factor that, could be a big anti-cancerous component. But, if you're on phones or if you're on your laptop and you have this blue light exposure and you're exposed to all these lights, that's not really triggering the pineal gland to release a strong amount of melatonin. So that could start to affect your sleep. But the other thing melatonin does, not only does it allow you to, calm down, but it also has your organ production and your system functions kind of slow down. There was data that looked at food consumption in the evening, close to bedtime. And for individuals that ate, it was like after 7 p.m. or within 2 hours of bed, they had longer rates of blood glucose postprandial. So glucose from the foods that they ate were staying in their systems for a longer period of time when they ate in the evening. And that means that the pancreas wasn't responding as well and promoting enough insulin to help pull that glucose out. For macronutrients or for caloric intake, that's not really impacting, food before bed if you're eating nothing in the earlier part of the day. However, for total health and all these other things that are impacted, like sleep and stress and all these other things, hormone production, that can certainly be an issue. And now hormonal factors that we got into a little bit. So cortisol, which is our stress response, insulin, our glucose response, and testosterone, which is affected by many of these factors we'll talk about. Cortisol regulates our metabolism, our immune system response, our stress response. It's produced by our adrenal glands, and it's also secreted by our secretion of cortisol is controlled by our hypothalamus, pituitary gland, and also adrenal gland. But chronically elevated cortisol can absolutely affect your weight loss efforts. Elevated cortisol levels, like sustained elevated cortisol levels in the morning, are associated with rapid weight gain in the face, chest, and abdomen. You're going to have increased blood pressure, which is going to affect your exercise performance, muscle weakness, and depression. It's hard to engage in an intense exercise program and commit to eating high quality foods if you don't feel well about yourself and if you don't feel good. It's like this. Again, this is where I said it gets choppy. That these things become into this really awful cycle to break because you engage in poor eating patterns, not exercising. That then causes cortisol levels to rise even more. And it's just this downward spiral. So, getting the sleep, getting the exercise, getting the stress management is really important in how it relates to our weight loss efforts. Insulin. So insulin, we've talked about this a lot again, and a lot of people are familiar. It's an essential hormone for controlling our glucose levels, and it's produced by the pancreas. So basically, whenever we eat carbohydrates and they get broken down and we have glucose in the blood, our pancreas then pushes insulin out to shuttle the glucose out of the bloodstream and into the muscles, liver, and fat tissue. However, chronically elevated insulin levels, so overconsumption of carbohydrates, which a large percent of the population is guilty of, is going to impact our health in a number of ways. So chronically elevated insulin can actually impact your growth hormone response, your growth hormone output that you have in your sleep. It's going to really affect your carbohydrate utilization. It's inflammatory. We talked over time that, among a number of things, having chronically elevated insulin levels is so inflammatory that can yield to certain types of degenerative diseases of the brain, like Alzheimer's and dementia. So managing carbohydrates is not just important or managing insulin response to carbohydrates is not just important for our weight loss efforts and our muscle efforts, but also for our cognitive efforts. With insulin, the thing that's difficult is that a lot of people may work out in the morning. They may have coffee with some sugar, or they may have a bowl of oatmeal, which is great. But if they're wondering why weight loss isn't happening, they're eating all these good foods. I challenge them to keep insulin levels as low as possible prior to their exercise if weight loss is the number one goal. If weight loss is your goal, you want to optimize your fat burning potential as much as possible, but still be able to perform in short bouts of high intensity efforts. So if the insulin is low, then it's almost like you can jump right into attacking your fat stores as an energy source with exercise. If you have a large bolus amount of rapidly absorbed carbohydrates prior to exercise, that's not a bad thing if you're lean. That's not a bad thing if you're trying to build muscle mass. That's not a bad thing if you're trying to get a lot stronger and perform better. But if weight loss is your number one goal, now you have this wall of insulin in the blood that is going to limit your potential fat loss efforts. Testosterone, everyone's with Cenegenics, I know, is familiar with testosterone. We've talked about it a lot. It's produced by the gonads. In men, that's the Leydig cells in the testes, and for women, it's in the ovaries. And in both sexes, it's made in the adrenal glands. It maintains strength and development of muscle and bone, and it's a large factor in recovery of exercise. Low testosterone production really impacts many factors. Low testosterone can impact a lot of things, from sex drive to training performance to exercise recovery to mood, but it's also influenced by many factors too. Things like diet, like exercise, like sleep, like stress, they're all major components. So for hormonal factors, we want to optimize the management of our stress by streamlining our efforts. So with the stressors of hormone sides, we want to implement programs around the non-negotiables, like I mentioned before. Patients at Cenegenics find a lot of success, not only because we're able to track certain things all the time and make those changes and make those pivots in their program, but also we're clear that, we need to know which things cannot be negotiated in your schedule or within your lifestyle, so that we can implement a program around this that's going to be more effective for you, that you're going to be able to sustain. We want to maximize sleep to manage cortisol and also improve testosterone levels. We want to exercise with intensity to trigger an anabolic response. So high intensity interval training versus low steady state cardio is going to have more of a growth hormone output. We want to support insulin sensitivity with smart nutrition. We want to enhance recovery with consistent protein consumption that a lot of people fail to do. We also want to consume fats from a variety of sources. We just don't want to over-consume them in each individual meal. So the goal is to build a plan unique to your own individual needs. So too often, for someone who's looking to lose weight, you find a plan online that's been promoted by a certain celebrity or a certain person you follow on social media, and you try to build up the willpower to follow it for as long as you can. And that's just setting someone up for failure, because it's not individualized to you. It doesn't know the little nuances and the relationship you have with food and with exercise and your sleep and your stress levels. So look at these things and start to put together a plan that's specific to the things that you need. So for nutrition, number one, again, heal your gut for optimum nutrient absorption and digestion. Prioritize protein for your growth and maintenance of lean muscle mass. You're also going to have more satiation and higher thermic effect from food. Carbohydrate consumption, primarily through fruits and vegetables. Denser carbs like the oatmeal, like I mentioned, wild rices, those can all be included for someone who is leaner, who has good insulin sensitivity, who is exercising very hard and doing a lot of resistance training. Think of those dense carbohydrates like the rices and potatoes as like an energy currency. If you are working hard, then you can pay yourself. If you are working very lightly, then I'd stick with more fruits and vegetables as your payment of carbohydrates. You're going to get a lot of fiber from your carbohydrates as well, specifically fruits and vegetables. So that's going to improve satiation. You're also going to get those micronutrients that we talked about. Fat consumption, again, from fatty fish, grass-fed meat, whole eggs, different nuts and oils, but just manage the consumption so you're not stacking the fats on top of each other. For exercise, prioritize high-intensity interval training if possible. Select a mode that's correct for you. Resistance training is going to be your long-term, building muscle mass, which is going to help improve insulin sensitivity and how you utilize carbohydrates. Rest periods for fat loss should be around 30 to 90 seconds between sets. If that's a pretty short amount of time for you, I do recommend supersetting exercises so that you have some sustainable strength in between those rest periods during your workout. Lifestyle, we want to manage your stress with meditation, trim the fat off your schedule. We want to improve our sleep by improving our sleep hygiene. People say I slept like a baby last night. That's a good thing. We want to have, that full 75% of our growth hormone secretion that evening to allow us to recover, to allow our cortisol levels to recover, and to really set us up for, a really, positive start to the next day. And hormone health. Again, this is where we get into that whole synergy component. The sleep management, the stress management, the exercise, all of these things are going to help improve testosterone in individuals. Yes, there's a certain point in many individuals where clinical intervention may be implemented, and that's highly based on the individual, where we could implement bioidentical testosterone replacement. It really depends on the individual and require lab testing and also a clinician looking at some of the symptoms you're experiencing. But exercise with high intensity to trigger an anabolic response. Again, high intensity interval training is going to be more beneficial to your hormone health than low intensity exercise. Insulin sensitivity is going to be improved with your smart nutrition, which over time will help your hormone production as well, and consistently get your protein consumption in. And always remember, like I said, plans provide a stimulus to create an adaptation. But upon an adaptation, the plans need to be updated. So don't be stuck in March and April in the gym and you don't know what's going on. You don't know how you've not seen any changes yet. And it was a program you started January 1. In those 12 weeks time, you become more fit, you become stronger, your cardiopulmonary health has improved. It's time to take the next step and to adapt and to recreate a stimulus to push you in the next level. Not only is that going to help with your training performance, but it's also going to help with your fat loss efforts. And it's okay to pivot your plan. This is what I mean by, when a cookie cutter plan you find online, something roadblocks you, like a meeting hits, or, maybe you had a family member have an accident and you needed to, take care of them. Maybe, a child was born and your schedule is totally thrown off. It's okay to pivot. There's many ways to the top of the mountain. There's many paths to the top of the mountain. So if there's a roadblock that you can't get around, find a way around it and just readjust that plan, because we want to stay on this for the long term. So you can't just be butting your head against an immovable object over and over and over again. You're just setting yourself up to fail. So don't be afraid to have an honest discussion with yourself and say, this thing I can't move. I can't get around this. Well, let's change the program so that we can actually do that. So a couple of things, just motivational things to remember is adjust to accommodate those non-negotiables. Know your why. In the short term, people say, why do you need to lose weight? Oh, I'm too fat. I just want to look better. It's beach season. You need to find something deeper than that that's going to keep you on track long term. When you don't have a lot of excess fat tissue, when you don't store a lot of this fat tissue, it's going to be easier for your heart. It's going to be better for your overall health. It's going to be better for your body. It's going to be better for your inflammation. So focus on those things, because, while weight loss typically starts as an aesthetic goal, it has a lot of positive changes long term for your actual health. Don't put a title on how you eat. Don't say that I'm of this tribe or I'm of that tribe. You eat for you. And when you do that, you don't get stuck to this title or this tribe, where you can make these changes and make these pivots where you need to. Know what's in the food that you eat. If you look at the ingredients, really eat foods that you're aware of. Stay away from packaged foods whenever you can. It's going to be more beneficial long term for having more consumption of micronutrients and macro minerals. It's going to be a much better objective for you. Find exercise modes that you can perform. Don't try to do stuff that you literally have no interest in and force yourself into doing it and willpowering your way into doing it. Find something that you enjoy and commit to that, because it's going to be easier to do it long term. Don't be afraid to invest in yourself. I mean, we say, treat your health like it's your 401k. You get a big return on it. It's going to help you out long term, and it's going to be setting you up for the future. And know your weaknesses. We have people on our teams that, they like bread. And when you go out to dinner, they bring out this nice basket of bread, and, that's their weakness, and it's not like a thing of willpower. It's just, that's how they are. And an easy effort is that you sit down at the table and you say, don't bring out a basket of bread, just have my water and we'll order. So be honest with yourself on all these things, understand why you really want to do this, what your weaknesses are, what you will and what you will not do, what you can schedule and what you can't schedule, and develop a plan to be effective around those non-negotiables. And lastly, I'd like to share this with everyone. We are offering a Veterans Day special promotion through Monday, November 11th, where we are offering $1,000 off of the Elite Health Evaluation at our centers, and $100 will be donated for every $100 will be donated to the Wounded Warrior Project with every evaluation sold. So I hope I gave you enough tools to kind of figure out things that you can use to put together your program on how to optimize your hormone production, how to optimize your weight loss efforts through nutrition, through exercise, and through all of these, cognizant practiced efforts. However, if you do feel that clinician support and physician support and looking at your lab work and kind of maybe looking into food allergy and sensitivities, looking at your hormone production, getting these tests done and having a professional team put together these programs for you to find success that you may be struggling with, I do really encourage you to call the number on the slide. Feel free to talk to our team about the things we discussed and even speak to one of our doctors at any of our existing centers across the country. So with that, I thank everyone for attending, and I'd like to open up the room for questions. So one of the questions was more on insulin management, if I could give more thumb rules to follow. And so the big thing would be, so when you exercise, so let's start with exercise first. So when you do high intensity exercise, you are starting to burn stored glycogen within the muscles and also burn through elevated glucose levels in the blood because your body is utilizing glucose as a fuel source. So high intensity interval training is going to be a great way to improve your glucose levels, which will then in turn help with your insulin response. The other component of exercise with resistance training is that we store glucose as glycogen in our muscles. So the more muscle you have, the more glycogen you can store, meaning the more glucose you can store. So those two things, building lean tissue and training at a high intensity level, like anaerobically, like we discussed, are going to be two ways that you can improve your insulin sensitivity and your insulin response via exercise. Through nutrition, a good thing you can do is focus on more fruits and vegetables. They are going to be very high in vitamins and minerals, and they're going to be very low in actual glucose that's absorbed into the body. So that's going to be a great way for us to actually start to reduce the need for insulin response. If you have a smaller amount of glucose going in the blood, the pancreas doesn't need to release a lot of insulin. So doing that week over week, month over month, long term, you're going to be able to see a lot of improvement in your pancreatic function with your insulin response. The other thing you can do is to consume proteins and fats with your carbohydrates. So even if you are having more dense carbohydrates, they're going to be providing more glucose in the blood. Having them with proteins and fats is going to help slow down the absorption rate of those carbohydrates, triggering less of an immediate blast of insulin. For example, if I ate a Pop-Tart, that's just straight carbohydrates, processed carbohydrates, that's going to throw in a lot of insulin really quickly. However, if I do the same, 40 grams of carbohydrates from oatmeal, but then I also have maybe some blueberries in there with skin and everything, and I put some cinnamon in there, that's going to help with the glucose uptake. And I do that with some whole eggs in the morning. That protein, that fat, and those other compounds through fiber and through the cinnamon are going to help have a slower digestion rate and have my pancreas release a smaller amount of insulin. And I guess the fifth one you could do is, try not to, eat late. If someone wakes up in the morning and eat breakfast at say 6 or 7, eat dinner at a normal time if you can, 5 or 6. Then every single day you're having potentially a 12-hour fast. You're eating within a 12-hour window, which is great, and you're eating frequent meals there. However, that 12 hours of downtime where your body doesn't have a insulin response because you're not eating any carbohydrates for that 12 hours, that's another good way because it allows the pancreas to rest. So I guess those would be 5 ways that you could really improve the insulin response. When should you recognize that what you're doing is not being effective and you need to make revisions? So with that, I'm not someone who's going to say, you need to be on the scale all the time, because that can open up a lot of negative connotations and have a really bad relationship of someone with their weight. However, for tracking purposes, I would recommend maybe weighing once or twice. Preferably twice per week. If I have an individual that's really focused on weight loss efforts, I would do weights twice per week, maybe Monday and Thursday morning, weigh yourself, and just keep a little log. And it's not like a pass fail, it's just for tracking purposes. And if over each 2-week period, so over those 4 weigh-ins, if you are trending down in the slightest, even 1 pound, then you're on the right path. And I really wouldn't change a whole lot. If you are trending up, then I would really look at a food log and see what things are going on, maybe see where you're over consuming, maybe see if you're not exercising as hard, and then try to adjust that. But if you're losing maybe 1 to 2 pounds every 2 weeks and trending slowly, then I'd say you're on the right path. If you're dropping a ton of weight within that 2-week period, it can happen initially. If you're eating a ton of poor carbohydrate choices and then you start to live a healthier lifestyle, you might see a pretty drastic reduction right off the bat. I wouldn't, be too scared of that. But if that, once you hit your kind of day in, day out, you've been eating healthier for a few weeks now, if you're dropping pretty aggressively, I'd probably take a look to see if you're over exercising, if you're under eating, because again, we want to make sure we're not having that unhealthy relationship with diet and exercise. So a more steady, slow weight loss is going to be, more beneficial long term. So if someone is dropping weight too fast, I would say let's bump up your food a little bit, or let's take a look at your exercise log. If you're doing interval training 5 days per week, while that's great for your heart health, if you have a healthy heart already and you're not trying to improve your sprint performance, but you're trying to not lose weight so fast, I would either dial that back or add some food in. Does dark mode help on my phone before I go to bed as it relates to sleep hygiene? As much as I'd like to say yes, I'm going to say no. It's definitely better than having like an actual blue light right in your eyes. So everything falls on a spectrum. So it's much better, but really the best option is to not have exposure in front of your face of that light. So while yes, it's better than not being in dark mode, if you're in dark mode, that's maybe one step. If you're in dark mode and you also have that nighttime timer on all the time, so even that white writing is more orange, that's a better one. But really just not having it before bed is going to be much better. Another thing that can help with that melatonin production too is having more sunlight in the eyes in the morning. So if like you want to do low intensity cardio that day, then I'd say go outside and go outside in the morning when the sun's out and either get a walk in or go to a park and do your sprints. But having sunlight exposure in the mornings has been shown to also improve melatonin production at night. And also limiting exposure to blue light is going to be important in the evening to allow melatonin to be released from the pineal gland. There's one more question about what are the best ways to target weight loss in the midsection. Two sides of the answer to this. Generally speaking, you can't, we don't really say that spot reduction is possible. However, if someone has if their hormones are really offline, for example, like a man, if we look at labs done, and he could be 35% body fat, but if we have a man who's 35% body fat who doesn't have excessively elevated estrogen levels, he's probably going to be storing more in his upper stomach area, whereas someone who has really elevated estrogen levels are going to be storing it more in their hips. So hormones, cortisol, estrogen, all these things, they really affect maybe where we store some of our fats. So that could play somewhat of a role. But as far as exercise and nutrition really impacting spot reduction, I say that's not really a way to go. It's like if you put on your socks and shoes and you try to take your socks off without taking your shoes off. It's not really a possible thing. Where there's a larger amount of fat on your body when you're heavier, there's still going to be a larger amount of fat in relation to your new size when you're lighter. So it's more so just focusing on the long term and getting overall the total body fat down, focusing on building new lean tissue, and then the fat's going to come off how the hormone is kind of relaying it to. And with that, I think we are completing our webinar. So again, I want to thank everyone for joining today, and we'll have the dates out for our next one. And again, thank you for joining, and please do not forget, we have the Veterans Day special of that $1,000 off for our Elite Health Evaluation, with $100 being donated to the Wounded Warrior Project. Thank you to everyone, and have a great day.